The transmission came without warning. No diplomatic prelude, no build-up, no formal introduction. It simply appeared, broadcasted across every known communication frequency in the galaxy. The message was short. Turn back. Do not test us. For a moment, the vast galactic network stood still. Every species, from the hyper-intelligent Okari to the war-hardened Rilvash, listened in silence. The message was traced back to a single source, Earth. The name sparked mild curiosity at best. Earth? A backwater planet in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy. No interstellar fleets. No notable trade routes. A species barely out of its cradle, still tethered to their homeworld. The Galactic Council convened almost immediately. Representatives from thousands of species gathered in a grand hall floating in the neutral zone of space. The discussion was brief. It's nothing but arrogance. A desperate attempt to sound powerful. Let them talk. They pose no threat. Most dismissed the warning outright. The universe was vast, filled with empires that had stood for millennia. Humanity, by contrast, had barely been acknowledged as a spacefaring race. But there were whispers. A few species, those who had studied Earth more closely, hesitated. The humans had a strange history, one that did not follow the usual patterns of galactic civilizations. Their wars had been devastating. Their scientific progress unpredictable. Their ability to adapt unmatched. Some on the council argued for caution. What if the warning is real, they asked. But they were ignored. In the end, it was decided. Earth was a joke. A mere curiosity. Nothing more. The Vakeen Empire, an aggressive, battle-hardened species, saw the warning as an invitation. Their leader, Grand Marshal Telvor, laughed when he heard the message. They think they can challenge the universe? Let's see how long they last. Within days, an armada was assembled. Hundreds of ships, armed with the best technology the Vakeen had to offer, set course for Earth. The galaxy watched with interest, some eager for a show, others quietly uneasy. Earth did not send another warning. Earth did not negotiate. Earth did nothing. The fleet continued undeterred, closing in on the small blue planet with every passing hour. The Vakeen commander, confident in their impending victory, sent his own message to Earth. You had your chance to surrender. We will take your planet by force. For several minutes, there was silence. Then, finally, a reply. We warned you. The transmission ended. Then, strange things began to happen. The Vakeen armada surged forward, its fleet stretching across Earth's orbit like an iron fist ready to strike. They had conquered over 100 worlds, crushed civilizations that had defied them, and now they would add Earth to their list. Their ships hovered in the void, massive constructs of war, plasma lances primed, planetary suppression protocols engaged. A standard invasion. It was supposed to be routine. But something was wrong. The humans weren't panicking. There were no frantic distress calls. No diplomats pleading for mercy. No desperate attempts at surrender. Instead, silence. Grand Marshal Telvor sneered at the lack of response. They're either too primitive to understand what's coming or too afraid to reply. The fleet commander, a cautious strategist named Ral Zarek, frowned. Something feels off. But Telvor dismissed the concern. The Vakeen were warriors, unmatched, dominant. They had never lost a war, never met a species that could stand against them. Earth would fall like the rest. Launch the first wave. 10 dropships streaked through Earth's atmosphere, descending toward major population centers. Surveillance indicated that humans had no planetary defense grid, no automated turrets, nothing to resist an invasion of this scale. The ships landed with a dull thud in the heart of Earth's cities. Vakeen warriors marched forward, weapons raised, expecting terrified crowds. But the humans, they were just watching. Not running. Not screaming. Not fighting. Just watching. The Vakeen soldiers hesitated, unnerved. Something about those human eyes, their calmness, their quiet patience, made their instincts scream at them to retreat. Telvor, watching the invasion unfold from his command deck, growled. What are they waiting for? He activated the loudspeakers across the city. Humans! You have one chance to surrender. Bow before us, and we will allow you to live as servants of the Vakeen Empire. Silence. Then, finally, a single human stepped forward. An older man, weathered by time, with steel-gray eyes that seemed to pierce through the very soul of the invaders. He looked up at the Vakeen warships, at the soldiers surrounding him, then spoke. You think this is your invasion? His voice was calm. No. This is your trap. The words sent a shiver through the alien ranks. Telvor felt it too, an inexplicable sense of dread. Then, the first anomaly appeared. The air rippled. Weapons powered down on their own. Electronics failed. Communication channels cut out. The sky itself seemed to darken. The humans hadn't been waiting in fear. They had been waiting for this. The Vakeen soldiers shifted uneasily, gripping their weapons tighter. Their guns refused to fire. Plasma rifles, disruptors, even basic communication devices, all dead. A soldier slammed his helmet, trying to restore his visor's display. Nothing. The sky above twisted unnaturally. A low hum vibrated through the ground, deep and resonant, as if the very planet was reacting. Grand Marshal Telvor, watching from orbit, barked out commands. Report. What's happening down there? No response. His officer scrambled, attempting to regain communication. Screens flickered, glitching as an unknown force disrupted their systems. The fleet's AI stuttered, unable to comprehend the interference. Something on Earth was interfering with their technology, something unnatural. Ralzarek, the fleet commander, turned to the Grand Marshal. We need to pull back. Telvor growled. We do not retreat from primitives. But even as he spoke, the first distress signal from the surface blinked onto the screen. It was a Vakeen warrior, helmet off, eyes wide, panting as if he had seen death itself. Sir. The transmission cut out. All across Earth's cities, the Vakeen soldiers faltered. Their war instinct screamed at them, this wasn't how invasions went. The enemy was supposed to be afraid. But the humans, they stood in silence, calm, composed. A woman in a red coat smiled at a Vakeen soldier, unafraid. Still think we're weak? Then, a pulse. A deep, invisible wave rippled outward, an energy that sent Vakeen warriors staggering. Their armor suddenly felt heavier. Gravity had changed. One soldier collapsed to his knees, unable to stand. Another struggled as his legs trembled beneath his own weight. The Vakeen were a strong species, their bodies built for war. But they had never encountered this before. From orbit, Telvor watched in shock. What is that? What are they doing? Sensors were failing, warships drifting out of position. The very laws of physics were shifting around Earth. The planet was fighting back. Then, the human spoke again. Not in desperation. Not in fear. A single, unified message. We warned you. Panic spread through the Vakeen ranks like wildfire. Soldiers collapsed under their own weight, their armor suddenly crushing them. Weapons lay useless in their hands, refusing to fire. Their once mighty war machines flickered and shut down as if the very air had turned against them. Grand Marshal Telvor, still watching from his orbiting flagship, gritted his teeth. Deploy reinforcements. Now. Ralzarek hesitated. Sir, the fleet is experiencing anomalies. Telvor spun around. What anomalies? His answer came in the form of alarms blaring across the bridge. Red warning lights flashed as systems flickered and died. Weapons platforms deactivated one by one. Thrusters failed. The mighty Vakeen armada, a fleet that had dominated the stars for centuries, was now adrift. And Earth? Still silent. On the ground, the Vakeen warriors were now struggling to breathe. The very atmosphere felt heavier. A lieutenant fell to his knees, gasping. It's the gravity, it's changing. A scientist among them tried to make sense of the readings, his hands shaking as he stared at his datapad. This isn't possible. Gravity doesn't just change. The humans stood watching. Unshaken. Unafraid. A young human boy, no older than 10, tilted his head curiously at a Vakeen soldier struggling to lift his arms. Why are you shaking? The soldier tried to respond, but his voice failed him. Then, the skies darkened. Clouds rolled unnaturally fast, twisting into an eerie spiral. The ground trembled, not from an earthquake, but from something deeper, as if the planet itself was awakening. Then, without warning, the first Vakeen dropship crumpled like paper. No explosion. No energy weapon strike. Just pressure. A force unseen twisted the massive metal structure inward, folding it as if it were made of cloth. The soldiers barely had time to scream before the wreckage collapsed into itself. One by one, the other dropships followed. The Vakeen's only escape route. Gone. And then, for the first time since their landing, the humans moved. From orbit, Telvor watched in horror. He turned to Ralzarek. How are they doing this? The fleet commander's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't think it's technology, sir. Telvor grabbed him by the armor. Then what is it? Ralzarek slowly turned his gaze toward Earth. His mouth felt dry. Sir. I think the planet itself is fighting back. The Grand Marshal's blood ran cold. And then, Earth responded. The fleet's dying speakers crackled with sound, the same eerie transmission repeating. We warned you. The Vakeen soldiers no longer stood as conquerors. They were trapped, helpless against forces they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't even begin to understand. Earth wasn't resisting them. Earth was absorbing them. Gravity twisted unpredictably, making movement impossible. Some soldiers felt their bodies grow impossibly heavy, crushed under invisible pressure, while others felt light as if their feet barely touched the ground. Weapons still refused to function. Armor systems remained dead. The once mighty Vakeen armada, feared across the stars, was now nothing more than prey. From orbit, Grand Marshal Telvor clenched his fists as he stared at the chaos below. Get those ships operational. We are not losing to a backwater species. But the Vakeen fleet was crumbling. One by one, their warships began to drift. Engines refused to ignite. Navigation systems flickered wildly, some ships turning in slow, uncontrolled spirals. Some vanished entirely, swallowed by distortions in space that should not have existed. Then, something new happened. The planet spoke. Not in words, not through a transmission, but through every sensor, every ship, every exposed nerve of the fleet. A deep pulse rippled outward, shaking the very fabric of reality around Earth. And suddenly, every ship's databanks filled with something strange. History. Not just of this battle, but of Earth itself. Aboard the Vakeen flagship, Ralzarek's hand shook as he scanned the readings. The data being transmitted from Earth was ancient. Some of it made no sense. Some of it terrified him. He turned to Telvor. Sir, you need to see this. The holographic display flickered to life. Images rushed past, scenes of Earth's history, but not as the Vakeen knew it. There were no primitive tribal wars. No slow evolution of civilization. Instead, they saw vast structures rising and falling, cities of impossible scale, wiped from history as if they had never existed. They saw creatures that defied explanation, towering beings that walked among humans as equals, only to vanish without a trace. They saw wars, not between nations, but against something else. Something the universe had long since forgotten. Ralzarek's voice trembled. Earth is not a new species. He turned, looking at his commander with wide, horrified eyes. They've been here before. Telvor frowned. What are you saying? Ralzarek swallowed. We've always thought humanity was an anomaly, a new species, recently spacefaring. His breath hitched as he pointed to the screen. But what if we were wrong? The screen showed stars shifting, galaxies moving. Time itself seemed to reverse. And then, there it was, a single, chilling image. A human fleet, impossibly vast, drifting through space long before the Galactic Council had ever formed. Before the Vakeen Empire. Before any known civilization. On the ground, the Vakeen soldiers, still struggling against Earth's overwhelming force, suddenly understood. This was no ordinary planet. These were no ordinary beings. The humans had not been left behind by the universe. The humans had left the universe behind. And they had warned them. From orbit, Telvor finally began to feel it. Fear. Not fear of war. Not fear of death. Fear of what they had awoken. Then, across every ship, one final transmission came through. A voice, calm and steady. You should have listened. The Vakeen fleet was in shambles. Their warships, once symbols of galactic dominance, now drifted lifelessly in orbit, trapped in a force they could neither measure nor understand. On the ground, the invasion force had been silenced. Their bodies were pinned beneath crushing gravitational shifts, their minds shattered by what they had seen. And above them all, Earth watched. But the humans did not speak. Not yet. Instead, the truth began to unfold. Aboard the Vakeen flagship, Ralzarek stared at the data pouring across his screen, his face pale. This isn't possible. But the readings didn't lie. Grand Marshal Telvor loomed behind him, his pride cracking into doubt. Explain. Ralzarek's fingers trembled over the controls. This history, it shouldn't exist. He swallowed hard, struggling to find words. Earth was never a primitive world. They're older than us. Older than any of us. He tapped a command. The display shifted, showing a record lost to time. Galactic charts scrolled backward, star systems moving in reverse. The very fabric of time unraveled before them, peeling back layers of forgotten history. And then, it appeared. A vast human empire. Not the fragile, ground-bound civilization they had assumed, but a force that once ruled the stars. Not a race just discovering space travel, but a race that had already seen the end of empires. Not a species meant to be conquered, but one that had chosen to vanish. Telvor clenched his fists. This is a lie. A trick. But the images kept coming. They saw human fleets, larger than anything the Vakeen had ever built. They saw planets burn beneath weapons that defied physics. They saw a war, one fought not for power, but for survival. Against an enemy the records refused to describe. An enemy that no longer existed. The final images were the most chilling. Earth itself, surrounded by wreckage. Human ships, once mighty, now lifeless husks drifting through space. A war that had left the stars scarred. And then, silence. No records of what happened next. No traces of what the humans had fought. Just one final entry in the forgotten archive. A single sentence, written in an ancient dialect, but translated across every screen. We sealed ourselves away. The universe is not ready. On the surface, the Vakeen invaders stared at the humans around them. At their calm expressions. At their absolute stillness. The humans had known all along. One of the trapped soldiers forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse. What are you? A human man knelt beside him, tilting his head curiously. You think we're new? The man's voice was quiet. We were here before your people crawled from the dirt. The soldier shuddered. They had never stood a chance. From orbit, Telvor staggered back. The war was lost, not through battle, but through knowledge. Through fear. Ralzeric turned toward him, voice barely above a whisper. Sir, we should have listened. Telvor's hands shook. His entire life, his belief in Vakeen's superiority, was crumbling. He could not fight this. No one could. And the worst part? The humans had not fought back. They had not needed to. Then, the final transmission came. One last warning. One last, undeniable truth. Do not return. The battle for Earth's survival was not fought in a traditional sense. There was no blazing war, no final charge of soldiers. The real fight had been over before it even began. As the Vakeen fleet floundered in orbit, unable to move, unable to communicate, and unable to retreat, the humans simply waited. In the cities, in the wilderness, in the very heart of Earth, humans moved with purpose. It was as if the planet itself had become an extension of their will. The landscape seemed to respond to their presence, forests grew thicker, mountains swelled higher, as if Earth was preparing to defend itself once again. On the ground, the remaining Vakeen soldiers lay prone, helpless, their bodies too heavy to move under the crushing gravitational force. They looked up, their faces twisted in disbelief, as the humans walked past them, unbothered, untouched, and unafraid. The commander of the invading fleet, Ralzeric, stood frozen in his command room. His mind raced. He had seen every inch of data, and now he understood, Earth was not the simple planet they had thought it to be. It was alive, and it remembered. And Earth had not forgiven their arrogance. Telvor's hands trembled as he watched the images of his fleet's destruction flash on his screen. The once feared armada was no longer a symbol of dominance, it was defenseless. Ships spun out of control, dropping like lifeless leaves through the blackness of space. He turned to Ralzeric. We cannot stay. We must leave now. Ralzeric's voice was a whisper, filled with the weight of defeat. It's too late. For the first time in his career, Telvor felt powerless. A lifetime of victories, of conquest, had crumbled in mere hours. And the humans had done nothing. Nothing but watch. Back on Earth, the humans stood in quiet unity. Their message had been heard, but the invaders had not listened. One of the human leaders, an elderly man who had watched the destruction of Earth's defenses, now stood at the forefront of their actions. He approached a group of Vakeen soldiers, all of them frozen in place, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. This is your chance, the man said softly, his voice carrying across the air. Leave. Leave now, and we will let you go. We will not destroy you. The Vakeen soldiers could barely respond. Their bodies weighed too much, their minds too clouded to process the kindness in the offer. They could not understand. The leader knelt down, his expression calm, his voice carrying through the stillness. You were warned. But now, you are free to go. The universe will remember this day. It will remember why we stay hidden. But for you, go. Leave Earth, and do not return. The humans did not attack. They did not celebrate. They simply watched as the last of the Vakeen fleet tried to make its escape. The ships, damaged and crippled, limped away, unable to do more than drift. Earth's gravitational pull continued to manipulate their movement, just enough to make sure they left. And so, with a final moment of mercy, the humans allowed them to leave. The invaders had learned the hard way, Earth was no ordinary planet. The message had been clear, and it would echo through the galaxies long after the Vakeen had gone. Earth was not to be tested. The warning was absolute. But there was something else in the silence. A truth that now hung in the air, a truth that the rest of the galaxy would soon come to understand. The universe had underestimated humanity. And perhaps that was the greatest mistake of all. The days that followed the Vakeen fleet's departure were filled with silence. Not a silence of absence, but one of reflection. The humans did not celebrate. There were no grand speeches or celebrations of victory. No parades. There was only a quiet, solemn recognition that the universe had learned its lesson. back on Earth, the world began to rebuild in its own way. The cities that had once appeared vulnerable to the Vakeen invaders were now thriving again, the gravity fluctuations slowly stabilizing. The survivors of the invasion moved with purpose, not in fear, but with the knowledge that Earth had protected them. The humans understood something now, something the rest of the galaxy had ignored. Earth wasn't simply a planet, it was part of something greater. The message had been delivered, but not with weapons or war. It had been delivered with the truth. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Vakeen, mighty and unchallenged for centuries, had been humbled. For the first time in their history, they had been forced to retreat in the face of a species they had dismissed as primitive. Other civilizations watched. Those that had once laughed at Earth's warnings now began to understand. They began to question their assumptions, to wonder if perhaps there was more to this planet than met the eye. The Galactic Council, which had once regarded Earth as nothing more than a curiosity, now stood at a crossroads. Many members urged that the humans be brought into the fold, treated with the respect they deserved. Others argued that Earth should be avoided entirely, for fear that this ancient power might strike again. In the end, a decision was made. A quiet agreement echoed across the stars: no one would approach Earth again. Not because Earth had won the war. Not because it had destroyed its enemies. But because Earth had shown the universe its true strength. One by one, the galactic powers withdrew. No fleet dared approach. No ships ventured near. The warning was clear, and it would not be forgotten. You were warned. The words echoed through space, carried on the wind of every civilization, every race. The universe had been taught a lesson, and it would take a long time for anyone to forget what had happened. But there was still one question left: would humanity ever return to the stars? Years passed. The universe moved on, but it would never forget the warning from Earth. A young alien, one who had grown up hearing tales of the mysterious humans and their planet, approached an elder. Do you think Earth will ever send its ships into the galaxy again? The elder looked at the stars for a long time, his expression unreadable. I hope they don't, he said softly. Some forces should never be tested. And with that, the galaxy was left to its quiet reflection. Earth was no longer just a distant memory, it was a force. A power beyond comprehension, beyond technology. It was a force that would never be challenged again. And in the hearts of those who had dared to invade it, the warning was clear: the universe should have listened. Years passed. Time moved relentlessly across the stars, but for Earth, it seemed like nothing had changed. The warning still echoed across space. You were warned. It was a phrase that no one dared forget. It had become a part of the fabric of galactic lore, a story passed down across planets. The Vakeen fleet's humiliation was no longer the stuff of whispers, but of universal truth. No one dared approach Earth again. The galaxy's powers had learned the hard way: the humans were not a species to be trifled with. Their quiet strength, their patience, their ability to remain hidden in plain sight, it was something no one understood, and no one was willing to test again. The warning still blared through the void of space, clear and undisturbed by time. On a distant planet, a young alien, curious and full of questions, turned to the elder of his species. He had heard the stories, had felt the weight of the warning in his bones. Will humanity ever return to the stars? The young alien asked, his voice filled with wonder and uncertainty. The elder, eyes heavy with the wisdom of centuries, gazed up at the stars, his face hidden in shadow. For a long moment, he was silent, lost in thought. Then, in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of the galaxy itself, the elder spoke. Pray that they never do. The young alien was taken aback, confused. But why? They are so powerful, so mysterious. What could possibly be wrong with that? The elder turned to face him, his gaze sharp, as if he could see through the very fabric of time. Because, my young friend, some forces should never be tested. And humanity is one of those forces. The young alien stood still, processing the words, feeling the heaviness of them settle deep within. There was something in the elder's voice, something in his eyes, that made the universe suddenly feel very small. And so, the galaxy moved on. Empires rose and fell, civilizations expanded, and others disappeared into the void. But Earth remained untouched. The ships that once roamed toward it were now kept at bay by an unseen force, a collective respect that crossed light years and whispered through the stars. Humanity, a species thought to be weak, insignificant, had proven something greater than strength. They had proven that survival, patience, and intelligence were often the most powerful weapons of all. And those who thought they could conquer Earth had learned too late. The universe was not ready for the full force of humanity. The warning continued, its message unchanged: you were warned. The universe finally understood. Some forces should never be tested. And so, Earth remained, silent, patient, a force that would never again be challenged. Not because it feared the galaxy, but because it had nothing to prove.